right? So we can find ourselves moving into that masculine, that traditionally masculine space of ambition and breadwinning, and then struggling to feel seen in the feminine and feel connected to our femininity. I don't think that this is something we can't deal with. There are really clear ways that we can move between those two polarized spaces and stop ourselves from feeling like our partners need to hold a specific role. In fact, we can custom create a relationship that's right for us, where we maybe are the more ambitious partner, or where we are trying to balance the different parts of nurturing and taking care with our ambition, and trying to figure out how that balances with a partner and what parts of that they pick up. We're really custom creating. All of us are. We're custom creating relationships because the old rules don't suit a modern life.
Yeah, because I like what you say about custom creating, because that's very important, you know. But then, as much as the old rules don't suit a modern life, we kind of have in society set rules which people expect us to follow still.
Yeah.
So I find out if there's a disconnect between trying to set new rules for yourself or set new to the way society in general expects us to be.
Yeah. Well, you're bringing up an important point. One of the things I do is help couples recommit to themselves and set aside time to practice being in their relationship, because when you practice being in your relationship, you can then separate out all those expectations, those rules, those things, those societal standards that you feel pressing on you, that can have you actually acting in ways that don't work inside your actual relationship. If we practice being conscious and communicating with our partners about what we really need, and we do that regularly, then it's much easier to live in a society that doesn't necessarily understand exactly what we're doing.
You see, I have several therapists that have been on the show, several, self-help spiritual people, and a lot of them say the same thing. You've got to communicate with your partner what you really need.
Yes.
Now, there's always a disconnect. There must be some sort of disconnect because people still need psychologists and self-help people, and they're always telling them you've got to communicate. Now, what does one do when you have a non-responsive partner? Because sometimes one partner could be trying to communicate, but the other partner is kind of closed.
Yeah. Well, it's important to turn our curiosity to what's causing that closing. It's not it's not a question of more communication is necessarily better. Quality of communication is what we're looking for. And not everyone uses the same number of words. If our partner is closed down, we can start making change by simply being curious about what's causing the closing up, and how we might soften the space and soften our own expectations to allow them to express in the ways that work for them currently, while also inviting them into conversation. In other words, let me put this more simply. If we point a finger at our partner and say, you need to communicate more, that is an aggressive stance, and it doesn't actually invite our partner into our space. So instead, if we can soften a little bit into, okay, this isn't working, so where could we meet in the middle that would be a productive place for us to talk differently? And often what it is we need to practice talking about the things that do work. We so often try to focus on, let's communicate about the things we're not getting, or we need and we're not getting, or the things that aren't working, or the places where we're falling down together. I ask people to instead start with what is working. Where are we coming together in a good way? Where do we, shuck off the rules of society and find ourselves co-creating something awesome, and start building from there? And that way our partner can feel how we are seeing where they are showing up for us. And that goes both ways. That's also something we can ask for from our partner. Like, let's focus on the positivity. If we have a base of positive connection, it is much easier to build up vulnerability and showing up for each other. But if we don't have that base of positivity, we become trapped in those cycles of, like, I'm going to pull at you to get you to fix something.
So saying that, how honest should one really be in a relationship, when communicating to the other person? Because, you might say something that could really piss them off, or they might feel like, oh boy, how could you say that? You're the one, because people do get defensive in these situations when
Absolutely.
trying to sort out this issue. So how would you know, tell someone to approach that?
So, honesty is an interesting thing in relationships. I happen to really, really love deep honesty that gets messy very, very quickly. Not everybody does, and that's okay. Honesty needs to be built on that solid foundation, right? So we want to try to incrementally increase the vulnerability that we can have. When we're talking about something that might make our partner defensive, what's the softest and most stable way we could talk about it? So the thing I tell people is, how about if we decide to, for instance, have an intentional conversation? If we're going to say something honest that we know is going to set off some fireworks, what if we set up for success? Let's set aside a little time, 45 to 90 minutes, say, light a candle, sit down together, and intentionally say, we're going to just talk about this. And at the end of this time, my goal is for us to be closer together, and actually say that up front. And then remember to use all the basics that we're taught, I statements, speak from your heart. But more importantly, only try to tackle just so much. Don't reach out into every complaint you have about your relationship. Take on one thing at a time. If you've got something important to discuss, keep the discussion narrow. If you were trying to overhaul your business, you don't go in and just tear everything up all at once. That doesn't work. We instead get focused and strategic about what we're approaching.